One foggy autumn morning in 1987, a 16-year-old girl vanished without a trace from the quiet town of Elderwood. No witness, no struggle, no goodbye. Just an empty seat at the breakfast table that stayed untouched for years. The police called it a cold case, but her mother never stopped setting 2 cups of tea. And one day, inside a rotting school cabinet, she found the reason why. Autumn in Elderwood is always quiet, as if the whole town is breathing slower beneath the red leaves. The people of Elderwood seem to speak softly in this season. All sounds become gentler, the honking of car horns, the sound of shoes on the ground. In a white house at the end of Laurel Street, Claire Moore poured water into a kettle, placed it on the stove, and sat down at the dining table. There were 2 sets of chopsticks and bowls on the table. She said it this way every morning, not because she forgot, but because she never stopped hoping. The seat opposite her remained empty. No one had sat there for 5 years. The small kitchen was meticulously clean. The walls were still painted pale yellow. The old floral wallpaper and the wooden cabinet by the window were opened every morning to welcome the sunlight. Claire cleaned each drawer on sleepless nights. On those nights, she would often sit in the middle of the kitchen, placing her hand on the table, imagining her daughter's hand on the other side. Sometimes she thought she heard a light laugh, the sound of footsteps running through the hallway. But then the ticking of the clock would pull her back to reality. Rachel Moore disappeared on an autumn morning exactly like this one, cold, misty, and no one noticed anything unusual. 16 years old, she had long, flowing brown hair and a gaze that often went quiet mid-sentence. The day Rachel vanished, her red coat was still hanging behind the door. Her shoes were clean of dust, and her poetry notebook on her desk was still open to an unfinished page. The police found no trace, no crime scene, no witnesses. Only an invisible void that continued to expand in Claire's heart. The sound of boiling water popping the kettle lid startled her. Claire stood up, poured tea into 2 cups, and sat down again. She looked at the empty seat. "Do you want peppermint or chamomile?" she whispered, her voice as light as the wind. There was no response. The red coat still hung on the door. It had been there for 5 years, untouched. Claire didn't allow anyone to wash it, nor did she put it away. Because Rachel had said, autumn was the season of red. "You know, Mom, leaves don't fall because they die. They fall because it's time," she used to say. Every Thursday morning, Claire went to work at a private clinic in downtown Elderwood. The work was simple: bookkeeping, taking blood pressure for the elderly, and listening to them tell the same stories every week. She worked not because she needed the money, but because she needed a reason to leave the house. On the way home, she often stopped in front of the wooden church, where Rachel used to sing in the choir. This morning was no different. Claire walked through the rusty iron gate and entered the church. The pews were still lined up neatly, shafts of light streaming through the stained glass windows, falling on each row of seats like shimmering memories. She didn't pray, because she didn't believe God would let her daughter disappear like that without a word. The wooden door behind her opened, slowly, politely, as if the person opening it didn't want to wake anyone. A woman entered. Her hair was graying, and her thick cloak was covered in dust, revealing a long journey. She sat down next to Claire, not touching her, not intruding on the silence, just quietly sharing an atmosphere as cold and thick as the night before a storm. After a moment, her voice rang out, small, hesitant, and heavy as if swimming through thick fog. "Claire." Claire didn't turn. Her eyes were still fixed on the crucifix in front of her, not because of faith, but because there was nowhere else to look. "Have you ever thought," the woman continued, her hands clasped together, "maybe she just wanted to go away for a while? Maybe. She just needed to get away from everything for a little bit?" Claire closed her eyes slightly. Those words weren't new, but each time they were spoken, it felt like an old knife reopening a wound that had never healed. "No, Ruth," she replied, her voice not loud, not angry, just like a leaf that had just fallen from a branch. Rachel wasn't the type to run away and leave her mother behind. Outside, the wind blew harder. Red leaves swirled on the ground like wounds that refused to sleep. That morning, it rained lightly, the kind of Vermont rain in late autumn, persistent, cold, and without a distinct sound. Just a thin veil of water falling evenly on the tiled roofs, blurring car windows, softening the mud, and making the smell of moss under the walls rise sharply. Claire sat behind the wheel, watching Elderwood High School gradually appear in the white mist. She never thought she would return to this place, at least not as a cabinet repair person. But things happened by chance. The school's new manager was a former patient who had called to ask her to look at the wooden cabinet system behind the old literature classroom because the budget wasn't enough to hire a professional. "You're the only person I trust," the young woman said over the phone, and Claire, for some reason that she herself wasn't sure of, had agreed. The classroom was at the end of the north hallway, a hallway that had been almost forgotten since the new area of the school was upgraded. Claire had to turn on the lights herself, the weak yellow light flickering for a moment before stabilizing. The smell in the room made her pause. The smell of dust, old books, rotting wood, and something else that couldn't be named. Perhaps memory. She used to sit in the back row, listening to Rachel read poetry in class, her eyes sparkling as if she had just touched her own dream world. Now, the podium was covered in a thick layer of dust. On the wall was still a small blackboard, the white chalk writing faded. "Metaphor is the soul's whisper." Claire put down her tool bag, gloves, flashlight, and some basic tools. The wooden cabinet against the wall was riddled with termite holes, and the bottom drawer couldn't be pulled out. She began to remove the hinges, prying off each layer of decayed wood to inspect it. When the last large piece of wood popped out, Claire frowned. Behind the inner part of the cabinet, which should have just been the back panel against the wall, there was a hollow space, and in that space was a strange object, a tin box, so old that rust mottled both sides of the lid. It wasn't large, about the size of a hand, but someone had carefully stuffed it into the gap between two wall studs behind a layer of wood that was almost impossible to see without completely removing the cabinet face. Claire bent down and reached in to pull the box out. Dust flew up, and the cold, metallic smell filled her nostrils. Her heart began to beat faster, whether from tension or something else. She wasn't sure. Her hands trembling, she opened the lid. Inside was a small stack of papers, a folded note, and 3 loose photos. Claire carefully lifted each photo. They were photos of Rachel, taken secretly. One from the corner of the desk, Rachel was tilting her head, writing something. Another, Rachel was sitting leaning against the classroom window, her gaze distant. The last one, Rachel was smiling, a crooked smile, but the image was blurred as if in motion. Claire immediately recognized the coat her daughter often wore. She had never seen these pictures before. The letter was at the bottom of the box, folded in half, the paper yellowed with age. The handwriting was slanted, soft, and so familiar that Claire froze as soon as she saw it. She didn't need to open it to know. It was Rachel. She took a deep breath and began to read. "Mom, if you're reading this letter, I probably didn't have time to tell you everything. I don't know what to do. I don't want to make you sad. But I'm scared. Every day I try to look normal because I know you're trying to be strong. But Mr. Jacob, he makes me feel like I'm not myself anymore. I don't know if I did something wrong. Because he's always gentle, always smiling, always saying that I'm special, that no one understands me like he does. And you believe him too. You trust him like you trust a part of the family. That's what scares me the most. Because if you trust him, who else can I trust?" Claire didn't know when she had collapsed to the floor. Her knees were numb, her hands still holding the letter, the flickering light on the wall making everything seem to tremble with her hurried breaths. Mr. Jacob Ellis, her husband's best friend from college, the one who taught Rachel how to write poetry, the one who used to sit down to dinner at her kitchen table, helped build the bookshelf for her, carried Rachel all over the park in winter when she was 8. the one Rachel used to call Uncle Jake. Claire looked back at the photos. Who took them? Why were they hidden in the wall? And why did Rachel write this letter but never send it? Her eyes scanned the bottom of the small note clipped between the stack of photos. Just one line. "Don't tell anyone. They'll think I'm making it up." In that moment, something broke in Claire's head. She stood up, clutching the tin box to her chest. She walked out of the classroom, the glass door reflecting her face. And for the first time in years, Claire saw clearly in her eyes that there was more than just pain. There was suspicion, anger, a form of awakening, fierce and dangerous. She walked through the school hallway like someone returning from a long dream, but no longer the same person. It was still raining outside, colder. Each of her steps was heavy, but firm. She knew that after today, she would no longer wait in silence. No one could call Rachel a dreamy girl to dismiss what had happened, not after what she had just read, and not when Claire Moore was still alive to find out the truth. Claire didn't remember how she drove to Jacob's house. The winding trail around the small forest south of town was familiar, where she used to go on picnics with her ex-husband, and Rachel used to spend afternoons picking yellow leaves, now suddenly seemed foreign. All she knew was that her hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles were white, and the tin box was sitting quietly on the passenger seat, irrefutable evidence. Jacob Ellis's house was nestled between two rows of old pine trees. The red brick facade had darkened over the years, and the wooden eaves were covered with black tiles. Nothing had changed since the last time Claire had been here. One spring 3 years ago, when Jacob invited her to dinner to commemorate the anniversary of her husband's death. The wooden door opened after the second knock. Jacob was still the same, white shirt, brown pants, holding a thick book in his hand. His face didn't show any surprise. He just tilted his head slightly, saying in an even tone, "Claire, what a surprise. Come in." Claire stepped over the threshold. The air inside smelled of black tea and freshly polished wood. Everything was neat and warm. Jacob led her into the living room, where Rachel used to study with him on weekend afternoons. Now, it was still the same gray sofa, the old wooden table, and the bookshelves reaching to the ceiling. Claire sat down, placing the tin box in front of her. Inside were still the 3 photos, the note, and the letter. Jacob glanced down, blinked once. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice calm. "In the old literature classroom," Claire replied, her eyes not leaving him. "Behind the decayed wall." There was a moment of silence between them. Jacob poured tea into 2 cups. Steam rose lightly. The fragrance of cinnamon and licorice wafted through the air. He pushed 1 cup towards her, as if this conversation were just a normal late afternoon. Rachel was a sensitive child, Claire. She was prone to dreaming, to imagining things. You know that. He smiled, no longer a caring smile, but something perfectly chilling. "What about these photos?" Claire asked, gently touching the photo of Rachel sitting by the window. Jacob shrugged. Maybe they were taken by a classmate. They used to play with cameras back then. Don't you remember? And the letter? Her handwriting. There's no mistaking it. Claire pushed the note closer. Jacob picked it up, read it over, without changing his expression. He placed the letter back down and nodded slightly. Maybe she felt pressured. I had high expectations for Rachel, and maybe my teaching method was a little strict. But Claire, I never did anything wrong. You know me. No. That word made Claire laugh, a bitter laugh. Right. She used to believe him so deeply that she never questioned it. Jacob had been the man she trusted most after Mark died, the one who came to help her family, the one who helped Rachel write her scholarship application, the one who used to say, "Your family is my family." Claire stood up. "I need to think about this." Jacob didn't stop her. He just stood up and walked her to the door, still with that smile. But his eyes, those eyes were no longer the gaze of a loved one. but something as cold as metal under snow. Back in the car, Claire slammed the door. She sat in silence for a few minutes. Her breath was ragged. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, but from the feeling of betrayal that had begun to gnaw at her from within her bones. She used to believe that she could recognize good people by intuition, by the feeling of a mother. Now it was all collapsing. She looked at her watch. Almost noon. The Elderwood Police Department was next to the town hall, an old brown brick building with a few clumps of daisies in front of the yard. Claire went in and asked the receptionist to see the file on Rachel Moore's disappearance in 1987. She was refused. The file had been transferred to state-level archives since 1990. But, the receptionist said softly, "There's a new officer reviewing some old cases. You can try talking to her. Reyes. Monica Reyes." Monica's office was at the end of the hallway on the second floor. Claire knocked. A young woman's voice called out, "Come in." The room was small, bright, papers piled high, an old computer emitting a soft hum. The woman stood up, her hair tied neatly, her face angular, her eyes sharp but not cold. She extended her hand. "Monica Reyes." "What can I do for you, ma'am?" Claire handed the tin box over. "I need you to read this." Monica didn't ask any more questions. She silently turned each photo over, read the note, then opened the letter. For 5 minutes, the room was silent. When she finished reading, Monica looked up. Her eyes hardened. "This letter was never submitted to the police? Number I just found it yesterday. And you know the person named Jacob Ellis in this letter?" Claire nodded. Monica sat down again, turned on her computer. She searched through the database and typed in a few lines. A moment later, she turned the screen around. "Did you know that from 1984 to 1989, 3 female students who were in Mr. Ellis's class abruptly asked to transfer schools? No reason given in the files." Claire was silent. "Do you want me to investigate unofficially?" Monica asked, her eyes not leaving Claire. "No." Claire replied, her voice low but firm. "I want an official investigation. If I need to sign a statement, I will." Monica nodded. "I'll start with these names." Claire clenched her hands tightly. She didn't know what she was about to step into, but one thing she knew clearly: from now on, silence would no longer be a safe haven for anyone. It wasn't until the 3rd day since reopening the case that Monica Reyes received a full copy from the Vermont Education Archives. She invited Claire to come early, even before the town police began their staff meeting. On Monica's desk were old student files, thin paper, printed with a typewriter, yellowed around the edges. "Here," she pointed to a line highlighted in yellow by hand, "Jacob Ellis's literature class, school year 1985 to 1986. 3 female students transferred schools mid-semester too. No reason clearly stated, just marked as at the family's request." Claire bent down to read each name. A familiar name appeared, Helen Brewster. "I remember Helen," she said slowly. "Rachel's classmate in the first year of high school. She came to my house to play a few times, liked to read classic books. Then suddenly she was gone." Monica nodded. "I found a trace of Helen. She's living in New Hampshire, working as a librarian for a small high school." "Does she know what happened?" Claire asked, her voice hoarse. "We're going to ask." Monica stood up, reaching for her car keys. "I made an appointment with Helen. She agreed to meet, but emphasized that she didn't want to talk over the phone. Later that day, they were in a small town bordering the eastern edge of Vermont, where the autumn sun set quickly behind the trees and every house had a curved awning. The school library was built of red brick, a small but cozy building. When they entered, the smell of old paper and ink welcomed them with a feeling of nostalgia. Helen Brewster came out from behind the counter. She was over 40, her black hair straight and neatly tied. Her face hadn't changed much. Claire still recognized her immediately, but Helen's eyes were different. There was a thin mist of permanent vigilance. "Helen?" Claire called softly. Helen stopped, then nodded. "Mrs. Claire?" She invited them into a private reading room. When the door closed, Monica opened her bag, took out the picture of Rachel, and placed it gently on the table. A long moment passed. Helen didn't touch the picture. She just stared at it, as if she had just met a part of herself again. "I remember this one," Helen said. Her voice was small, dry. Taken after literature class, she didn't know someone was watching. Monica was silent, just nodded slightly. Helen bowed her head. "I used to be Rachel. I used to be like her, quiet, afraid, and thought that if I didn't say anything, it would pass." Claire clenched her hands tightly. "What happened, Helen?" Helen didn't answer immediately. She stood up, walked to the window, looking out at the schoolyard where some students were playing ball. "Mr. Jacob," she said slowly, "made us feel like we were special. Not in a cute, special kind of way, but in a kind of special that only existed in the dark. He chose us, the ones who were often lost, had few friends, liked poetry. He was gentle, listened, and then, little by little, made us believe that only he understood us." Monica recorded each sentence. Claire said nothing. Her eyes were wet, but without tears. "After Rachel disappeared," Helen continued, "I asked to transfer schools. Without telling anyone, I was scared. We were all scared. One person in the group even said, 'If we say anything, who will believe us?' She disappeared, but no one was arrested. So that means there was no crime." Monica opened her document bag, took out a faded printout, a copy of an internal email from 1987, which had been deleted from the system but recovered by the state archives. She pushed the printout towards Helen. Helen read it. The chilling words, "If I disappeared, would it be easier for you?" It was part of an email from an unknown sender, but the timestamp coincided exactly 1 week before Rachel disappeared. Helen nodded. She wrote that, not in an email, but in her poetry notebook. Rachel used to write many sentences like that. A question not meant for anyone, but anyone who read it would understand. Claire said softly, "I found a manuscript of her poetry. The last page has this line." She took out a piece of paper, reading slowly. "If I am the last leaf, will anyone remember this autumn?" Helen turned away, but her shoulders trembled slightly. She said nothing more. On the way back, it was getting dark. The car drove through the forest of maple trees, the headlights reflecting on the skinny tree trunks. Monica kept her hands on the wheel, but her eyes remained silent. "Do you see anything repeating?" she asked, her voice low. "What do you mean?" "The way Jacob chose students. Every year. Always the shy, dreamy girls, and always the ones who easily trusted people." Claire leaned her head against the glass. "That's why Rachel didn't tell me. She knew I trusted him." "But you don't trust him anymore," Monica said softly. Claire didn't answer, but her hand rested on her pocket, where she kept the letter Rachel wrote, like a talisman, like an oath. The next day, Monica received an email from the old school's archives department. They had been able to open Jacob Ellis's internal teacher email account from 1987, which had been locked because the system was too old. In it, a sporadic conversation between Jacob and a colleague named Kay Lamont. Jacob: "I think Rachel is losing control. She thinks the world revolves around her feelings." Kay: "She's the best student in your class. Maybe she just needs some space." Jacob: "If she disappeared, maybe things would be easier for both me and her." The last line. Monica read it 3 times. She sat back in the dark room, noting each point. The second person. Language structure, illusion, not clear, but also unmistakable. And above all, it confirmed something Claire always knew in her heart. Rachel didn't disappear because she wanted to. Jacob Ellis walked out of the classroom as if nothing had ever happened. His hair was grayer at the temples, but his demeanor was the same. Calm, listening, and always smiling just enough. Haven Ridge High School, where Jacob had returned to teach after retiring early from Elderwood, was a small private school nestled deep in the quiet suburbs of Bennington County. No one there knew about his past. Claire sat in her car, about a block from the school gate, her hands clenching the sleeves of her coat. She had come here 3 times in the past week, not to do anything, just to watch, to see how Jacob lived, when her whole world had been erased by him in one cold autumn in 1987. This morning, she saw Jacob talking to a female student about 15 years old, blonde hair, tied up high. The girl laughed, gave him a notebook, and ran away. Jacob stood there for a moment watching her, then turned back into the classroom. There was nothing wrong with that action, nothing excessive, but it made Claire feel cold from the inside. Evil sometimes doesn't wear the face of a demon. It wears the face of someone you know. Someone who used to pour tea, tell jokes, and be called by a familiar name like family. Uncle Jake. That evening, Monica called Claire from her office. Her voice was urgent but not rushed, a type of cold focus that only someone who had witnessed many ugly truths could have. I've received a portion of Rachel's diary, saved as blurry images on a police hard drive. I don't know why it was there, but it must be from when they searched her room that year. Claire came immediately. Monica's small room was covered with files, computers, and a laptop glowing in the dim light. On the screen was a photo of a notebook page, the paper stained with water. Rachel's handwriting was slanted, smudged in places. I don't know what to do. I feel myself shrinking every time I see him standing behind me. I feel like I'm the only one who knows something is very wrong, and no one believes it. I've tried to be quiet, but silence hurts too, even when he says, "This is how you learn to grow up." The last line, the writing shaking as if written with a wet hand. If I speak, Mom will lose faith. If I don't speak, I will lose Mom. Claire couldn't breathe. She turned away, but Monica gently placed her hand on her shoulder. "There's more," Monica said. "I need to ask you about a person named Lydia Haskell." Claire frowned. "I remember. Her daughter's name was Emily. She was in the same class as Rachel for the first 2 years. Then the family moved away suddenly, without telling anyone. I used to think they had some kind of financial trouble. I found Lydia's name in the old internal contact list. It seems she met with the principal and Jacob in a closed meeting. There are no meeting minutes." Claire tightened her grip on her bag strap. "I'll go see her." Lydia Haskell lived in a small town near the Massachusetts border. Her house was simple, the wooden porch painted white, the windows low. When Claire knocked, Lydia came out. Her hair was salt and pepper. She was wearing a thick sweater and jeans. Her eyes were a little wary. "I don't talk to the press," Lydia began. "We're not journalists," Claire replied. "I'm Rachel Moore's mother." The change came immediately, not on Lydia's face but in her hands. They froze in the air, then slowly lowered. Lydia opened the door. The 2 women sat in the kitchen. The room was so quiet that you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Claire told her briefly about the tin box, about the letter, about what Monica had found. Lydia didn't interrupt. Only when Claire finished did she say softly, "My daughter, Emily, told me that year that Mr. Jacob made her feel lost. I thought it was just a teenage crisis. But then I heard her crying in her room one night, and when I asked, she just said, 'If I tell, he'll say I'm making it up, and Mom will believe him.'" Claire didn't dare breathe. "I pulled Emily out of school right after that. I didn't want to investigate. I didn't want to make a fuss. I was scared." "Scared of what?" Lydia looked down. "Scared to know that I was wrong, that the person I trusted was the one hurting my child. And I knew, if I spoke up, he would say it was just a misunderstanding. Who would believe a child against someone like him, Claire?" Monica, with assistance from the Vermont State Digital Forensics Department, requested the recovery of a series of tapes from the Elderwood School's internal phone recording system, a type of content control that was tested in the 80s but discontinued after a few years. On a tape dated October 1987, a sound clip was distorted but still identifiable. A girl's voice, sobbing, choked. "Please, please stop. Don't come near me anymore." A man's voice, low, clear. "Shut up. If you tell, no one will believe you." Monica listened to the tape 3 times. Then she sent the audio-enhanced version to Claire. She listened once, then stood up and walked out into the long hallway of the police station, not saying anything, not crying, just leaning her head against the wall. For the first time in years, she heard Rachel's voice, trembling, panicked. No longer just words written in a letter, no longer just photos, but the real, rough, undeniable voice. A voice that had been buried deep beneath the stones of old files, now returned, like a last red leaf that people couldn't pretend not to see. Claire returned home late that night. She boiled water, made tea, and placed 2 cups on the table. But this time, she didn't look at the empty seat anymore. She looked at the window. There reflected her image, and a mother who was no longer silent. The file on Rachel Moore's disappearance in 1987 still read, "No grounds to reopen." A week after the audio evidence was found, Monica stood before the police chief's office, her face flat, but inside there was an undercurrent. "Reyes," her superior said, tapping lightly on the wooden desk, "I understand you care, but that recording can't be verified as the speaker. And the other things, photos, handwritten letters, faded memories, aren't enough to get a search or excavation warrant." "Even when the victim is a minor?" Monica asked, her voice hoarse. "No physical evidence, no living witnesses willing to stand by their names. No, Reyes, you have to stop." She said nothing more. But when she left the room, Monica's eyes had changed. No longer the gaze of an investigating officer, but of someone who had been cut off right in the middle of the truth. Claire received the news late in the afternoon, the phone ringing only 3 times and then stopping. But she still picked up the phone, as if she had known who was calling. Monica didn't beat around the bush. Her voice was a little hoarse, saying it briefly, but not hiding the suppressed powerlessness. "My superiors have asked me to suspend the Rachel case. The official reason is not enough evidence to reopen the old file.